So, for people who think I've gone dark, that's not quite the case. It's just that, with some gracious people's help, I've done what I could do in moving my catalog to mirrors in order to preserve some presence. After that, there's not much left to do or say. At least not right now, not when the process itself is depressing enough. Aside from that, I'm immersed in trying to find out the copyright status of Last Kind Word Blues at the Library of Congress, or finding a cover of it I can use. One thing I find while in this state of mind of flipping through cable channels looking for something to distract me is how little distraction there really is. Within a narrow band of channels, the content is news, shows about crime and serial killers and disappeared people and forensics and mobsters and war, and channels that seem to be all Hitler all the time. The motto that if it bleeds, it leads is taken on a 24-hour format, interrupted only by wee-hour infomercials promising the sort of things that would only appeal to desperate insomniacs and people who just close the bars. Which would give the impression, if you didn't realize just how much of an outlier all that is, that the world is an incredibly dangerous place full of monsters. And I think that's exactly the sort of overwrought stranger danger TV that our current crop of neurotic all-men-are-rapists grew up on, that fear-based view of the world sealed in college by quasi-scientific, agenda-ridden, subjective, self-selected such-and-such studies that are the same sort of cable television sensationalism dressed up as academic disciplines. Sex sells, violence sells, and tying them all together is a bright red ribbon of fear. And if that's too much for you, you can delve into the weird and wonderful world of CNN and NBC, where nothing is quite so free of actual issues as the presidential horse race between two thoroughly unlikable candidates that have been anointed by a completely incoherent system. Cream floats to the top, but then again, so does shit. It all depends on what you're churning. So we've got the spectacle of the Republican frontrunner, the presumed nominee, revealed to be press agent John Miller, a guy who sounds exactly like Donald Trump when he brags about Trump's tremendous success, an almost patented phrase of Trump's. All that simply confirms that where Barack Obama was our first black president and Hillary Clinton would be our first woman president, Donald Trump would be our first 12-year-old president. Especially as he now denies that the mysterious press agent that only existed on the phone in the 90s wasn't him, although he had previously admitted to it in depositions. If there is a horse race, it's between which candidate can be less transparent. Trump, by finding yet another reason to hold his tax returns from scrutiny, and Hillary Clinton maintaining that whatever cheerleading and promising she did for Wall Street in private, it's still none of your voting public business, Chuck. And there's a fucked up relationship dynamic in all that. Trump's appeal being that he's an irredeemable asshole who would be a third-tier creepy dude were it not for his resources, and Clinton falling back on the woman's due to demand that you trust her at her word. And whatever unlikely story she tells you, there's nothing more deeply offensive to her than attempts at verification. You peg. And whichever way you swing, you can be guaranteed a 4-year dysfunctional relationship where you emerge a little poorer, especially in spirit, and rebound into an even more outrageous piece of work. Although maybe that's what's happening right now. For all the audacity of hope of 2008 Barack Obama, he seems to be a placeholder president who really hasn't made good on any of the change that he promised. What might be his actual legacy is an administration's audacious, outrageous interpretation of Title IX that mixes like poison into travesties like crystal mangum in the Duke lacrosse case, Emma Sogowitz and her false accusations, her mattress, and an eventual meltdown porno performance art piece graphically recreating her narrative. And since she gives it the pretentious title, and excuse the French, Ceci n'est pas un vol, after the Belgian surrealist artist Treachery of Images, it proves that among the other things she doesn't get, one of them is Magritte. And then there's Sabrina Erdely, Rolling Stone, and Jackie's confabulated tale of gang rape on campus and the University of Virginia administration's supposed indifference, and the thousands of other young men too far below the radar to have their destruction noted. What the Obama administration has managed to do, by eviscerating any due process rights of the accused, making the process itself hostile to evidence and verification and making the accusation enough, is to completely weaponize claims of sexual harassment and assault, let alone rape. And we've already reached the point where harassment isn't considered something active. It has none of the form and intent from which the term arose, and can simply mean refusal to agree, and more generally, not provide validation. And so it's really no surprise that the administration has just released the audacious sequel to their Title IX Dear Colleague letter, which advocates letting anyone who identifies as transgender use bathroom and locker room facilities of their choice. Of course, it's just a directive and not law, but it may be codified with the same power of suggestion as the Dear Colleague guidelines. And it's not like the threat to cut federal funding constitutes just a friendly reminder. And I'm not arguing that this isn't an issue. I can see where being forced to use a given gender's facilities would be an undue hardship to someone sufficiently invested in their gender identity, just because their driver's license, for example, hasn't caught up with it. To that end, the goal of guaranteeing transgender students enjoy a supportive and non-discriminatory school environment is laudable. However, the guideline itself is vague and overbroad, another triumph of subjectivity, in actually who gets to cop to a gender identity on one hand. On the other, it seems a bizarre addendum to Title IX, where even adult women are protected like children from exposure to any sexuality that they don't consent to in writing, in triplicate, notarized with the option of recanting later, and then, in this case, to tell actual children to suck it up and deal with a little dick. More than that, why now? Unless it's a lame duck thing that the administration is trying to get in under the wire. Why would they pick an issue that is one of the right-wing fearmongers' go-to worst-case scenarios dating back to the Equal Rights Amendment and the specter of unisex bathrooms? The issue is guaranteed, and perhaps this is the point, to work them up into an absolute lather until they can't do anything else. And that's not to say that in any way, shape, or form I'm claiming that transgender people, especially male to female transgenders, constitute a predatory threat. What the point is that to the extent to which Title IX and related school policies arose from it to treat men as a predatory threat by default, it seems absolutely incoherent. Men are bad in this view, exactly proportional to the degree to which they aren't women. Men are only realized in 3D potential by being devoted, dangerous, or disposable. If monsters exist by this standard, they are only male and male surrogates, whereas women and their surrogates are only incidentally and more or less accidentally bad. I mean, for evidence of this, look at crime shows that feature women on cable TV like Snapped. You see, women aren't evil. The guy probably had it coming, like the guy claiming she made him do it. Women just snap. Whoopsie, honey, I just shot you dead. Silly me. Probably the reason for this thinking that men are predators is a facile similarity to how predation actually works. And I say this merely as a cute literary aside because I can. Predators pursue their prey. Men pursue women, or they become lifelong bachelors and GameStop Employee of the Month. But really, how it often works is that men, and human males are among members of one species along with praying mantis and wolf spider males, who gleefully opt into being the main course of sexual cannibalism. We men race each other into the tiger's jaws. I'm sorry, does that sound a little bitter? Well, you can attribute it to my going through the stages of grief in no particular order, having started in denial and isolation, hence channel flipping with the blinds drawn and my phone off, jumping over to depression and just hitting anger about now, which if you read between the lines in the stages of grief, it's also emergence from the whiny bitch stage. And bargaining, I'm going to give that a complete miss because really, bargaining is the problem. I'm at the age and probably radiate the attitude that I'm not approachable and I no longer find myself dealing with women who are interested in me for my own sake. I'm a commodity where I can easily bargain away my resources, buy myself a stay of execution until I have nothing left. I often have. From that perspective, I understand the motivation of guys who begin to adhere to MGTOW, men going their own way, who opt out not from untreated misogyny or some desperate backhand plea to be loved, but because more than once they found themselves up to their asses in alligators, or at least know of others who were death-rolled and pulled underwater. And the supportive one, the one who said she would never do that over text, she did that, and once again, it happened over text. Your promises are contracts. Hers are more or less simply aspirational. With the advantages women have in texting and ghosting, it's more like action at a distance, a drone strike from far away. Nothing personal. In her ongoing war of attrition eliminating all unqualified applicants, you and the goat are just collateral damage. Fuck it. Of course, to claim all men are rapists or even charitably qualify it by allowing that all men are potential rapists is considered all empowering and shit, whereas claiming not AWOLT, all women are like that, merely EWOLT, enough women are like that, is an unforgivable gender slur. The worst thing is I can't promise myself anything. I can't get into the mindset of people who think the world is a desperately dangerous place. And I know after I lick some wounds when it comes to being invested in women, even if only in the most casual way I have, I know I'll be back for more. Sort of like YouTube and these videos and the fight against the people convinced that the world is a shithole and you and I are merely component shit. You invest. You put yourself out there. You give a shit in life and in opinion. And not only is there always a downside, but some people are all about the downside. The downside is where they live and feed. It's their dark, predatory hole. Which is why I sometimes go to the National Gallery on pilgrimage, and perhaps why I was in a perfect position to let things get to me there. Because although much of the art is excellent draftsmanship celebrating questionable people doing questionable things, or acts of appeasement trying to score favor with patrons or gods, or appeal to the same tendencies as the worst of cable TV before there was cable TV, there are still little works of art like Vermeer who aim at nothing more than to capture a freeze frame of grace and beauty and immerse themselves in that single purpose. And after all, when you've been in the depths of the downside, you've eventually got to come up for air.